Hi, everyone. Thank you so much for joining us. Welcome to today's APQC webinar, 3 Steps to Innovation Capability. I'm Marisa Brown, APQC's Senior Principal Research Lead for Supply Chain Management and Innovation, and it is my distinct pleasure to introduce us to our guest speaker today. Steve Wunker, a longtime friend of APQC's and collaborator with us, is the Managing Director of New Markets Advisor. Steve has founded 4 pioneering companies and 2 nonprofits. He also led the team that created one of the first world's smartphones, and where would we be without that? He has competed with Microsoft, McKinsey, and an organized crime family. Sounds like there's a story there. Steve has counseled hundreds of companies on innovation opportunities. He's written more than 100 articles for Harvard Business Review, Forbes, and others. He has also authored 4 best-selling books, including his latest, The Innovative Leader. Steve is considered one of the world's leading authorities on innovation. And with that, Steve, I am turning it over to you.
Thank you, Marissa. It is always a pleasure to speak with APQC. I've been doing things with you since I think first 2008. And it is always a really diverse and thoughtful crowd. And so I hope you can send in some questions that we'll take at the end, and we can really have a good discussion about this. But what I wanted to do first is speak with you for about 45 minutes on some of the lessons that we'll see came out of my most recent book, The Innovative Leader. And I will share some of those research findings with you. So I'm, however, going to begin with a personal story, and we'll segue from there. So when I first stepped off a British Airways flight and entered Zambia, I set foot in a different. The day before, I had been running a software company in London where we had set processes and predictability. Now I'd taken a job in Zambia, a landlocked country in Southern Africa, to start Africa's first mobile payments company. In a place where even large transactions were still typically handled in cash, I was going to make money virtual. Me, a guy who had never so much as visited Zambia before. Now, back in London, my friends thought I was crazy to do this, and perhaps they were right. Zambia was chaotic. It was unpredictable. When I first arrived, I called the telephone company to complain about a landline that wasn't working. The telephone company's number had been disconnected. So that was just a little preview about what was to come. But I thought it was also a place full of opportunity. The chaos in large cash transactions also created an opening for an orderly payment system. So together with a bunch of scrappy, hardworking Zambians, we figured out how to deal with the chaos and unpredictability. We created orderly means of working in an environment that is chaotic and unpredictable. And in this environment, we built a modern software company that was an affiliate of the cell phone company. There you see, I even love by the way, the title, the name of this shop. It is the bargaining shop. There is no illusion about a set price. You come in there to bargain. This company ended up transacting about 5% of Zambia's GDP through its systems. It became part of Africa's biggest ever venture capital success. Our parent company was ultimately sold for over $3 billion. Now, I tell you that story because in many ways, our world is becoming more like Zambia. There is a jumble of events that are going on, and threats and opportunities seem to materialize from nowhere. But somehow we have to find a way to deal with that and to create order and opportunity in the chaos. Innovative leaders are the ones who guide through the chaos. They're the ones who are agile. They find the upsides. They are more necessary now than ever. Now, I realize what some of you may be thinking. Innovation may be a little bit suspect. Maybe it requires buying a lot of ping pong tables or growing out our hair. Well, folks, that's not going to work. There's a lot of disillusion with innovation out there, and for good reason. So here's some data from a recent McKinsey survey that showed that 84% of senior executives thought that innovation was critical to their efforts, their strategies, and yet only 6% were satisfied with the results. So it's a humongous gap of 78%. It's a disgrace. There is, however, a way to be consistently successful, and I will share that with you. To explain how I stumbled on that myself, I'd like to take us back to London before I ever set foot on that British Airways flight. I was working for the UK's biggest consumer electronics company back in 1999. And I had a meeting in the CEO's office, one-on-one, just him and me. Now, that was a rare event. I was just a few years out of business school. So after a little bit of chit-chat and my wondering why I'm there, he turns to me. And with one hand, he points to his cell phone. And then the other hand points to his computer. And he says, I want you to create one device that does both of these things. In today's language, we would call that a smartphone. Now, I've been trained at a top business school and a major consulting firm on how you're supposed to deal with big challenges. You're supposed to go out there and gather a lot of data and go analyze it. But this man was talking about something that back then we didn't even have a word for. There wasn't any data. No one knew if there was a market for this thing. As I started to walk out to the door, he turned to me one more time and he said, by the way, I want you to present the device specifications in 2 weeks. Terrible. So I felt fear and doubt, the same that many of us feel when we're confronted with big challenges and lots of unknowns. All the training I've received didn't tell me what to do. After a couple hours back in my office, futilely trying to draw slides with data that I wished I had, I stopped. Rather than kid myself any longer, I closed that list and I opened up a new document. There I created sets of lists, major uncertainties that we would have to resolve, key component choices like screen size that would drive a lot of other choices we would have to make. People I could speak with who might have different perspectives about the items on these lists. I created a system to deal with all the uncertainty and unknowns. And after a lot of listing and a lot of talking, I came to a reasonable approximation about what a smartphone was going to look like within 2 weeks. So it's there that I learned the lesson. Systems conquer chaos. Systems spot opportunity. Since that time, I've been looking for systems that work. I took that smartphone system to Zambia, and after that, I linked up with Clayton Christensen, who was a famous professor at Harvard Business School who coined the terms disruptive innovation, jobs to be done, and many other things that we associate with innovation. It was the author of the famous book, The Innovator's Dilemma. Together, we built up a consulting firm that sought to turn those academic writings into systems that innovators could deploy day to day to bring innovation into their companies. And in 2009, I spun out a firm, New Markets Advisors, that focuses on just this. So what I learned was that we could analyze markets super well, and we could create compelling concepts and plans. Great. But there's one thing that drives success more than anything else: leaders. Leaders make the difference. So starting in 2018, I set out on 5 years of research to inform my book, The Innovative Leaders. Together with co-authors who are executives at Philips and Procter & Gamble, we interviewed 50 innovative leaders from all walks of life: big tech, scrappy startups, well-established companies, companies in a turnaround, officials in government, in a church, in a school. And we found that no matter where you sit, you can be an innovative leader. So I'm here to share with you not just my own stories, but their secrets. Now, we're going to begin with someone who actually I was not able to interview, which is a shame because this person may have done more harm to the cause of innovation than anyone else ever. Now, you're probably guessing, right? Your boss? No, worse than that. It is, sorry, that's a list of people who I talked to. It is Leonardo da Vinci. Now, why do I say that? Why do I say that Leonardo was so harmful to the cause of innovation? It's because the myth of Leonardo da Vinci is all around us, and it does tremendous harm. We see his masterworks and we're intimidated that we could never create those things. We see his wild leaps of imagination, and we think that we could never have that burst of innovative genius. And then movies and stories drill that belief into us because it makes for a wonderful tale. But it's wrong. It's just simply wrong. Let's instead look at how Leonardo actually innovated. He started out with keen observation about how the world works, like in his analysis of how shade might fall onto a face. Without preconceptions, he wanted to go out there and really look at what was going on. And then over time, he went from that observation to questioning, having very detailed questions about how does something work, and then creating a theory to explain his answers to how things worked. And then once he had that understanding, he would experiment relentlessly to see if his theories actually played out in practice. And it was only after that, after observation, questioning, and experimentation, that the masterworks occurred. We have a name for this approach now. We call it the scientific method. There's no doubt that Leonardo was a great artist, but what made him so much better than his contemporaries was that he was one of the first people in the world to use the scientific method. So you can obtain great results too. You don't need to be Leonardo to do it. You simply need a systematic approach to get there. So the system starts with you and creating your leadership style. Do you inspire people to innovate? Do you push them to be audacious? How do you instill the behaviors that you want to see? Whether you're on your own or you're responsible for hundreds of people, your own leadership style deeply affects the folks around you. So your style matters tremendously. Now, who can tell us what to do with that, with leadership style? Well, let's go big and start with Microsoft CEO Satya Nadella. He was gracious enough to provide us several quotes for the book. So Nadella had to start his tenure at Microsoft playing a really tough hand. His predecessor as CEO, Steve Ballmer, had been CEO for 14 years. And during that time, the stock did very little except to decline by about a third. So Nadella knew he had to do something different. But he didn't just go in there and say, this is what we're going to do. First, he observed and questioned and listened. He wanted to make himself a role model for how the company should act, which in his view had gotten to be quite arrogant. So he talked a lot, as he did to us, about the need for listening and empathy. You start out with being really connected to the market and the role modeling that for your team. So he was able to, based on that basis, set a clear direction about where the company was going to go back when he assumed the reins in 2014. Cloud, 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 cloud. This was what Satya was talking about time and again. There would be the future of the company, which would be a huge change from the typical delivery and business model that Microsoft had practiced in the past. And over time, in those first 5 years of that strategy playing out, stock price did actually very, very well. It increased by more than 4 times. But what's really instructive about Satya's story is that he then evolved. He kept listening to the marketplace, and he started playing with tools coming out from other companies, including AI companies himself. He met up with this tiny 100-person startup called OpenAI, and then he was audacious. He invested $1 billion into that 100-person firm. And then he thought in 360 degrees about what the company could do with AI across the Office suite, in its Azure cloud services, in businesses as diverse as LinkedIn and Xbox. He really thought in a 360 manner. Then he made sure that people at Microsoft were enabled to go deploy on them. Ideas at Microsoft wouldn't just blow off, scattered away like dust in the wind. Instead, they had a place to implant and to grow. All this worked out quite well. And Microsoft's stock price is up over 11 times since Nadella was appointed as the CEO back in 2014. After having done nothing, or worse than nothing, under Steve Ballmer's tenure. So, folks, that is not a coincidence. That is the impact right there from innovative leadership. Now, Satya reflects a formula that we have seen play out time and again among the innovative leaders that we studied. And it has the acronym of CREATE, which is really clever, right? CREATE. He was connected to the marketplace. He didn't just charge in. He made sure he was going in the right direction. He role modeled the behavior for others in the organization that he wanted to see. He evolved. He kept on looking at what's next, what's next, what's next. He was audacious. He didn't study things forever. He studied them. He listened, but then he acted, and he was decisive. He thought 360 degrees about what the company could do to be innovative, and then he enabled his staff. So whether you're in a giant tech company in Redmond, Washington, you've got a startup, you've got a very traditional firm, you're the big boss, or you're a mid-level manager, CREATE delivers. All right. Let us think about then where we take this. Because you can't just be the rogue innovator yourself, right? You can't be having trouble advancing these slides. Maria, there we go. Now it's advancing. There's a little bit of a lag. You can't be Indiana Jones. Remember? What now, Indy? I don't know. I'm making this up as I go along. It worked, but Indiana Jones was not a senior executive. Organizations need a degree of predictability to innovate successfully, and you need to have a system to do it. So that starts with setting a very clear aspiration for the company. You begin there. And the reason you begin is in this data, which is from a survey we did actually just this year of corporate innovators. We asked them, what is the single most important obstacle to achieving your goals? 52% said that unclear goals was the biggest obstacle to innovation in their company. 52%. I knew it was going to be big, but not that enormous. So you need to set a very clear aspiration. So to talk about aspirations, let us look at cruising. One of our interviewees was Jan Swartz, who at the time was president of Princess Cruises. Now, when Jan became president of Princess, they had a real strategic problem. Companies were building cruise ships that were getting bigger and bigger and bigger, and they would have water slides and go-kart tracks, and they started costing over $1 billion a piece to build. And yet, the innovations that people would bring out would just get copied by competitors. And so there wasn't a sustained competitive advantage in this industry. So Jan knew she had to break the cycle. She had to do something different. And she set a clear aspiration that Princess would not necessarily have the biggest and fanciest cruise ships, although they'd be fine, but that they would excel in their customer experience. They would be known for having a really great customer experience. And then she went out and she went to hire an executive responsible for that from the company that she thought did customer experience at scale better than anybody else in the world. Disney. So she sent this executive in the first 3 months of his job. He spent those months on cruises, which is not a bad way to start work. And he saw a lot of things, a lot of problems to solve for. One was that people were standing around in line a lot, which apparently was a long-standing cruise industry tradition. And people were not having any sort of personalized experience as they were on these ships. They were treated like, the cattle, like in the line. And so he thought about different ways to solve for this. And they tested out a bunch. And they settled on something that was very different in the industry. It's a little bracelet that's worn. That's called the Ocean Medallion. And the Ocean Medallion will tell the crew who a passenger is and where they are in the ship at all times. So you don't need to line up to get on the ship. You just wave your medallion and you go. If you're in the bar and you order a drink, you just wave your medallion and it's paid for. Then you can go off and mingle. Not only is the waiter going to find you with your drink, he'll give it to you, greeting you with your own name. Now, we spoke with the person who was responsible for the Ocean Medallion, and he really told it like it is. If you're pursuing step change innovation, make sure you've got those parameters defined at the very start. And then you have degrees of freedom on how you go execute on those parameters. If you don't, remember these words, it's going to be painful, unsuccessful, or not very meaningful. So telling it like it is, you need to have a very clear aspiration set. So how do you do that? How do you set that aspiration? To do that, we are going to talk about ice cream. Maybe hot where some of you are. Marisa and Maria are in Houston. It is often hot in Houston, I know from years growing up there. So let us pretend that we work for an ice cream company and we need to sell more ice cream. What are we going to do? What are some ideas? Well, typically when I would bring that to an audience, they would say, we need more flavors. We need new sorts of ways of distribution. We need lower prices. Perhaps. Now, I'm going to put somebody on the spot here. Marisa, have you recently had ice cream?
Most definitely.
Most definitely. Okay. She is the unwitting audience participant. I want you to tell me the story, not on times on average, but the specific last time you had ice cream. Why did you have ice cream? And if ice cream hadn't been there, what would you have done?
So why I had ice cream was one of my daughters was in town. Um, the ice cream I had was my all-time favorite, Jamocha almond fudge from Baskin Robbins. And if we hadn't had ice cream, if we hadn't gone out for ice cream, we might actually have gone and bought ice cream and brought it home just to be able to be together and spend some time kind of reconnecting.
Interesting. So you were really trying to reconnect and have good time, and somehow ice cream was a way to make that happen. Maybe it's nostalgia I'm projecting here, or it was a traditional sort of thing you might have done. Interesting. So we could go through audience members, and I bet we'd have a lot of different stories. You're off the stage now, Marisa. You're safe. I won't call on you again. But what's fascinating is that all of your stories probably have absolutely no relationship to the toppings, the flavors, the price point, the distribution. Marisa just told you a story there about what we call jobs to be done, which is actually the title of my second book, Jobs to be Done. She was saying what she actually is trying to get done, not what the company happened to sell. One of the greatest management theorists of the 20th century was named Peter Drucker, and he once wrote, the customer rarely buys what the company thinks it is selling them. It's quite profound. The customer rarely buys what the company thinks it is selling him. So you need to understand what the customer is actually buying, and then set your aspirations accordingly. The great thing about doing that is not only will you be more connected with what the market is actually looking for, which is what Satya Nadella did as he went out there to understand marketplace needs, but also you have a consistent North Star, because what the customer is buying is going to be fairly stable over time. The competitive pressures you're going to face, the happenings in the industry, the price pressures might change. But the customer is that North Star. It sets that aspiration. That's critical to enabling innovation, not only over the short term, but over the long term as well. So make sure you understand what the customer's jobs to be done truly are. Okay, so now what? What a lot of people want to do after they set the aspiration is to jump into, let's get a lot of ideas. But the reality is that having too few ideas was the biggest problem reported by only 6% of our sample. Very rarely is the quantity of ideas the big challenge. Rather, it's what happens to the idea. Does it get executed at all? Does it have a place to go? If it does have a place to go, do you start molding it to conform to executives' preconceptions? Do you whittle it down a little bit to make sure it gets funded? Do you force fit it into certain models that the company has of how it operates or sells or distributes in order to make things a little bit less disruptive? Well, oftentimes the answers to those is yes. So what happens is that we tend to make the really big ideas small. So you need to build structures to make sure that the big ideas stay big and that you can actually go implement all the ideas that you have. So who can tell us about what to do with that? So let's turn to another one of our interviewees, Chip Bergh, the CEO of Levi's. When Chip became CEO, he set an aspiration to make the manufacture of jeans more environmentally conscious, because traditionally the process of finishing jeans and giving them that sort of worn and textured look would take thousands of gallons of water and dozens of chemicals, and Chip wanted to do better. So he chartered a cross-functional team that had this mission to make the manufacture of jeans more environmentally conscious. And then it had wide parameters of freedom on how to go do that, much like John Padgett, the guy at Princess, had recommended doing. And so they looked at a bunch of different technologies, and they actually settled on a system that uses lasers to create the finished jeans, which was great. It was a big environmental win. But they didn't stop there. Like Satya Nadella, they kept on asking, what if, what's coming next? And they happened upon a huge side benefit. Not only could lasers create that worn and textured look in a more environmentally conscious way, but it could do it at very short notice. And the technology could be moved from the major factories down even into the distribution centers. And so Levi's could keep on hand blanks, unfinished jeans, and then very quickly could customize them based upon fashion trends of the moment or regional trends or a particular retailer's orders. It could cut down on its inventory. It would have more simplicity in its inventory. And it could be more responsive to its retail partners while also being more environmentally conscious. Now, that's an example of making a big idea even bigger. And it's because that team was cross-functional. It could keep asking questions, and it could keep thinking, what if, what if, what if? It's the sort of structures that Schiffberg built at Levi's that enabled the big ideas to become big. So how do you do this in a company? How do you fight those forces of corporate gravity and make sure that the big ideas can be even bigger? How do you fight the consensus-driven decisions, the cautious resource allocation, the narrow competitive frames that are often set? Well, you got to use some anti-gravity. So rather than the consensus-driven decisions, embrace a culture of disciplined experimentation. Scientific method applied in a corporate context. So take that scientific method out of the labs and put it into your commercial operations as well. Have very clear processes where you have clear hypotheses, you invest a little in order to test those hypotheses, and then you build and you iterate, much like the scientific method would do. Bring that into the commercial side of the house. And then instead of cautious resource allocations, have bets in distinct lanes. Look, if you're going to be introducing new lemon flavor and you're currently a cherry flavor sort of company, all right, I think you probably can ask a whole lot of questions, take pot shots, because you know things pretty well. But if you've got a really big, potentially disruptive idea, then you don't know. And you have to accept a whole lot more uncertainty and learning throughout the process. Now, you can't do that for everything. And so you've got to have a different lane for that. But you need to be investing in there. You need to be tolerant of a degree of failure in that lane as well. And you need to make sure you're asking the questions that make the big ideas even bigger, not smaller. And then rather than having a very narrow competitive frame, you need to take what I think of as the iPhone approach. And I use that term because I was working with Clay Christensen back in 2007 when Apple first launched the iPhone. And Clay had a bunch of distinguished journalists call him that week from major business publications, asking the great man what his opinion would be about Apple's potential success with the iPhone. And you know what he told them? Apple's just going to get crushed. They're taking on a company like Nokia that has so much more resources and knows so much more about phones. They're never going to make it. Now, Clay was a very humble person. And he looked back on that moment a couple years later and he chuckled. And I remember him telling me, you know, I got it so wrong because I didn't understand what Apple had done. I thought they launched a phone, but they created this new thing. They created a true mobile internet device. They created a different way of being out there and being mobile. And then they created this whole ecosystem around them too. They didn't launch a phone at all. They weren't competing against Nokia. They were defining a totally new category. So when you can do that, when you can really root in the jobs that a customer wants to get done and define your category, think big, like Steve Jobs and Apple did back at the time, then you can prove the folks like Clay Christensen wrong. And you can create your own competitive frame. That's how you keep big ideas and make them even bigger. All right, so let's look one more time at that data about what are the big obstacles to innovation in a company. And you notice what the second biggest bar is. It's culture. Culture was the second biggest bar. It gets in the way a lot. It affects those hundreds of daily decisions that senior management can never make for itself. And it has to rely on people to make in the depths of the company. It matters hugely. So you need to cultivate the cultures and behaviors that you're looking for. That's when change is going to stick. So who can teach us about innovative cultures? Let's learn from someone who's done pretty well for himself through building one, Jeff Bezos. I interviewed him as well. Now, Bezos is obviously a super successful person, but he doesn't always win. I know how many of you remember the Amazon Fire Phone from about a dozen years ago. You could go point it at a device, and then with a tap, you go buy that thing on Amazon. It was a huge investment for the company, and yet it sold only about 35,000 units. It was a massive failure. Now, Bezos is hyper aware of Amazon's culture. He wants to keep it hungry and customer obsessed. So what did he do? Once it was clear that the Fire Phone had been aptly named and went up in flames. Two things. First, he took responsibility himself. He said, look, I should be the first person in this company to be customer obsessed. And yet I forced on customers a phone that Amazon wanted them to have. So blame me. And then he took the team that was responsible for the Fire Phone and he put them on another project that Amazon was cooking up at the time, the Echo and Alexa. And they went from tremendous failure to humongous success. And Bezos did that quite intentionally. It sent a message that you could be safe in Amazon and you can fail so long as you stay customer obsessed. Now, Bezos did that because he knows what is the most important room for innovation in a company. It is not the CEO's office. It's not some executive boardroom. It is absolutely not some kooky innovation room. It's the lunchroom. The stories that people tell there shape how a company actually behaves. What project got funded? What got killed off? Who got promoted? Who's dead to us now? Those stories shape the behavior. Bezos is a super powerful person, yet even he still needed to win the lunchroom. Now, one important thing about culture is to think about it a little bit like a brick wall. The bricks are the hard variables of management control. What projects do you fund? How do you measure success? How are they governed? The mortar is what makes it all cohesive. It makes sure that the bricks stay in place and act as this integrated unit. The mortar is the culture. And the critical thing is that the bricks come first. Culture lags, it doesn't lead. You need to start with the bricks first. You can put up all the posters that you want, and it won't change a thing. The culture matters, but it only follows once the bricks are in place. Now, how do you do that? How do you then plan for culture change once you've thought through the appropriate bricks. So you can do a few things here. First, think about, why does the culture exist today? It serves a purpose. It serves a purpose. That purpose may be historical. It may no longer matter. I once worked with a manufacturing company that up until quite recently had all of its employees, including people on the factory floor, wear bow ties. Bow ties. Women too. Everybody was wearing a bow tie. That was a historical legacy that no longer mattered. So what purpose does the culture serve, and is it still relevant? And then you really need to disaggregate and think about, what are the specific aspects of culture that you need to change. You cannot rip and replace a culture. You need to be very targeted. So what are those specific aspects, and what are those potentially related to? And then think in a staged way. What are the quick wins to create momentum, to get started, and show that culture things are changing in this company? And then what are some of the longer term levers to focus on that are going to take time to change, but you need to get started now? That's how you start planning for culture change. So that's your system. Create your leadership style. Then aspire, build, cultivate, create ABC. If you remember one thing from this talk, remember that acronym, create ABC. It will take you far. So I'm going to give you two pieces of homework. First of all, here is an organizational assessment that we've been actually creating in conjunction with APQC. You can assess how your own organization does on those aspire, build, cultivate parameters, and then compare yourself to other organizations that have taken this, this assessment as well. So it's about a 15-minute survey. So I urge you to snap that QR code, get in there, and take the assessment. I think you might find it very illuminating. And then secondly, it's one word, why. Ask why. Even in that example with Marisa, understanding about ice cream, I asked why? Why did you do that? Why this? Like Leonardo, ask why. Why do we believe customers behave a certain way? Why did they buy from that competitor? Why is the industry changing in this matter? Why do we think this product is going to be a success? Why? Think about some of the greatest innovators you know. They are not famous. They're actually little kids. What do 4-year-olds do? They ask why all the time. Why? It drives us crazy. The reason they ask is because they are innovating. They're figuring things out for the first time constantly. And they ask why because it works. It works for them. So rather than always trying to train it out of the little kids, let's learn from them too. And let's ask why. When you do these things, you will be prepared for whatever the world throws your way, when you have the right system in place. No one among our interviewees probably knows that better than Jan Swartz from Princess Cruises. When COVID first struck, 3 of Princess's 20 ships were struck by outbreaks. Authorities wouldn't let them dock for fear of the disease coming into their countries. They were literally stranded at sea while this new, mysterious, deadly disease silently crept from deck to deck to deck. People in the industry wondered if the cruising had any future. People on the ships were terrified, and folks were bit by bit dying. For Jan, who had been so hopeful about the Ocean Medallion and the customer experience, this time was incredibly and unrelentingly bleak. So what did Jan do? She role modeled behavior by getting out of her headquarters near Los Angeles and flying to the epicenter of the outbreak, which was then in Asia, so she could manage from the front lines. She set very clear aspirations to keep people as safe as possible and to make sure that everyone, passengers and crew, felt cared for. She built systems for rapid, continuous daily communication, knowing that she couldn't manage everything, but making sure that people could communicate amongst themselves about how to handle pandemic response from ship to ship. And she leaned heavily on culture. She knew that with 20 ships around the world, literally in the middle of the ocean, she could never manage the response entirely by herself. So she wanted to make sure that they could lean heavily on core shared values. So they did, as she told me. Everyone had to make decisions on the fly, but they all knew what our true north was because we had articulated our core values incessantly. In the fog of war, people had the discretion to make decisions that they felt were based in those core values. And eventually, Princess got people off the ships, and Jan was seen as a hero. She met the crisis with leadership and systematic thinking and was able to triumph. There's a saying that nobody wants to be a buggy whip manufacturer in the age of the automobile. Most of those folks, they didn't do too well. However, there was one company that had a different approach. It was the buggy whip leader in France. Now, its CEO, who was named Emile Maurice, was connected to what its core upper class customers wanted. And he decided to role model what the company should do. He told the management, "We are not a museum." And he left the headquarters in Paris to travel to Detroit. And he met personally with Henry Ford to understand the magnitude of what was going to come. He evolved the company from just using its leather making capabilities to create buggy whips and saddles, to create a whole variety of leather-based goods, including large bags that customers could put in the back of their automobiles, which were suddenly now quite practical to carry those bags from place to place. He was audacious in saying, we are going to go full on into making all sorts of leather goods and even creating other things like fine silks that the company's core upper class customers might want. He thought 360 about the possibilities. He actually acquired the exclusive French rights to the patent for the zipper. And then he was no artisan himself, but he hired a whole staff of artisans, which didn't terribly need with saddles and buggy whips, but you did if you're making bags or fine leather products. He met the crisis with Create, and he was able to deal with it. And today, that company, which was in Emile Maurice's family, is still around. It is still family controlled. That buggy whip manufacturer has a market capitalization today of over $200 billion. That company is Hermes. You can be Hermes in the age of the automobile, and you probably need to be, because the world is going to create more disruptions, more fast-moving events. Some are going to be dire crises, some are going to be major opportunities, and some are going to be both. Systems are your answer. Rapid, discontinuous change is best handled not through remarkable genius, sorry, Leonardo, not through world-class improvisation, sorry, Indy, but through systems. If you embrace a system like Create ABC, you can be agile in the face of disruption. You can see opportunity where others see threat. You can wade into uncertainty with confidence and be known for it. Look, the world is not going to slow down. It's not becoming more orderly. Fast change, disruption, uncertainty, and opportunity are pretty much everywhere. Old ways of managing are going to struggle to handle it all, but don't be daunted. Have a system, embrace the new world, and thrive. because you can be an innovative leader too. So thanks very much. Always a pleasure to be working with APQC. I'll give you here a QR code if you want to buy the book on Amazon. Take the organizational assessment, and remember, ask why. So, questions. I'm eager for your questions.
Thank you, Steve. Thank you for sharing your insights, the stories, the secrets, everything from the ice cream to the outdated bow ties, and create ABC. So I do want to just remind everyone that you will receive a copy of Steve's slides and this recording. And we have a number of questions that have come in. So we're just going to start with one here from Ovace, who wants to know, is every innovation a disruptor? At what point does one know if they have a viable innovation or a disruptive product, or is that just a matter of luck?
So most innovations are not disruptive. This is a term that Clay always regretted that he had not just drilled into people. That was much more clear, because it just got used as, oh, my new pencil is disruptive. No, it's not. And that's okay. That's okay, right? We need new pencils. We need new lemon flavor. Cool. That should be the majority of most companies' portfolios, unless maybe you're like a newspaper company and your core business is fundamentally threatened. The disruptive ones are those that often break the company's profit formula or reach new sorts of customers, or are operationalized in very different ways, potentially like through new distribution or have new ecosystems. They are typically the really big innovations, and it is good to have a few of those in your pipeline because they are inherently risky, and many are not going to play out as you planned. That's okay. You need to stage your commitments. So have both. Have the sustaining innovations and have the disruptors too.
Okay, thanks, Steve. So here's a question from Devraj. While innovation is disruptive out of the box, but you have to have the pipeline for innovation built, should there be a framework or a process? And if yes, what should be the elements in that framework?
So great question. I put in one of those slides that you need to have distinct lanes for the sustaining and disruptive innovation. And for the disruptions, you need to really stage your thinking. Make sure you've identified the market and the true needs, the true jobs to be done in that market, even before you start leaping into who are the competitors. Of course, you need to look at competitors, but they can often make you think really small. Root in that market first, and then iterate the concept over time. In fact, have several concepts, because there's typically no single right answer. There are many ways to play a potential disruption. And then eventually you want to go from that very wide funnel down to something that's much more narrow, and you can then iterate on that over time. Look, we could do a whole webinar just on that. We have a lot of writings on this. My first book, Capturing New Markets, covers this very well if you're interested in picking that one up.
Great, thanks, Steve. And I will say we have a lot of questions. If we don't get to them all during the webinar, we'll follow up with everyone via email. So here's a question, Steve, from Brian. We continue to hear that the vast majority of digital transformations fail to meet expectations. Is it a lack of setting clear expectations? Is it an execution failure? What's your take?
Oh, there is so much on that one. Yes, to both. There is often not a clear rationale for the digital transformation, particularly a commercial and customer-oriented rationale. It might often be just cost reduction through another means. You haven't really played out the systematic effects. You haven't played out how this is going to change people's ways of working, which are often highly ingrained. You haven't thought through all the obstacles to adoption, all the interdependencies that you have to take account of. There are lots and lots of reasons. I have written a ton on AI and how AI is being implemented effectively and not so effectively by companies. Same thing applies there. You can't just jump to the technology. You can't jump to the digital transformation. Root first in the use cases and the jobs to be done, whether they're external to customers or internal. And then you can work from there. What are the combination of solutions, which may be digital and non-digital, that actually achieve the change you're looking for?
Great. Let me give you another question from Ella. How can you be innovative and at the same time fulfill the financial targets? I expect to work smarter, but for me as a leader, this is a catch-22.
Oh, Marisa, you're giving me a chance to talk about all my books. So before The Innovative Leader, after Jobs to Be Done, I wrote a book called Costovation, which is about how do you bring innovation to the cost side of the business. I love this book. Because oftentimes we just think about innovation in terms of revenue. You can apply these tools on the cost side of the business, folks, and they can absolutely meet financial targets. Now, of course, whether it's revenues or costs, you need smart financial targets. You need to often think about what is that real growth gap between your existing product portfolio and where you need to go, and then have realistic expectations about failure rates. Oftentimes that is very sobering to then work backwards into the number of innovations and the size of innovations that you need. But do not go invest a gajillion dollars in some pet project. Think about venture capitalists. They are some of the world's best innovators. And they don't do that. They stage their bets a little bit at first, and then they stage more and more over time. I have a friend in the venture capital industry who says, when he describes what he does, I'm in the knowledge acquisition business. He is acquiring knowledge with his investments about which ones are going to succeed or failure. So think of yourself that way.
That's a great point. And that also answers another question we got, which is many companies say bold innovation is too risky and too costly. What to do about it? So maybe that approach of the venture capitalist mindset could apply there.
Right. Don't build the Saturn V moon rocket as your first thing. Build the bicycle. And I mean, that's what a venture capitalist is going to do. Now, okay, they can get a little loopy sometimes and go for these massive investments for a very small handful of marquee firms. But typically, they're going to invest a little, learn, invest more. And over time, yeah, sure, the Series C, the mezzanines will be big investments. Those come later.
Great. Thank you, Steve. And we're going to stop there to respect everyone's calendars. But just a reminder, you'll all receive the recording in today's slides. Thank you so much, Steve. And you can always visit APQC's website to view this on demand. We do have contact information included for both Steve and for me. And I just want to thank everyone so much for joining us today. And thank you, Steve, for sharing all these really interesting real-world-based insights and tips and tricks. Create ABC and connect with us on social media. And I just want to say thank you again, and I hope everyone enjoys the rest of your day.